Good morning, everybody. We're going to wait a couple minutes to see if there's any late risers there, and then we'll get started in about 30 seconds or so. All right, it looks like we have a good number of participants, so I'm going to start us off. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Automation Alley's virtual tech takeover, hosted by Sandalwood Engineering and Ergonomics and Visual Decisions. My name is Allison Trumbull. I'm an account executive here at Automation Alley. If you're not familiar, Automation Alley is a World Economic Forum Advanced Manufacturing Hub, or AmHub, and Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center. We host a plethora of events such as these ones and obtain content from every aspect of Industry 4.0 to give businesses a competitive advantage to help them along every step of their digital transformation journey. Here we obsess over disruptive technologies like blockchain, 3D printing, Internet of Things, and automation. Our goal is to work hard to make these complex concepts easier for companies and individuals to understand and implement. Today, this tech takeover is brought to you actually by one of our foundation members, Manpower Group. Manpower provides administration and support services, professional services, and business services through its 4 primary brands: Manpower, Experis, Right Management, and Manpower Group Solutions. If you have any questions regarding Manpower or have any staffing needs, there is contact info on the webpage for this event, or you can reach out to me personally and I can connect you with a representative. Now on to today's tech takeover this morning. For those of you that are not familiar with our presenting companies, Sandalwood Engineering and Ergonomics designs and executes strategic programs for manufacturers that reduce work-related risks to quality, productivity, and employee health. They approach with a systems perspective from process improvement to information flow, producing big picture results and helping organizations work smarter. Visual Decisions works with customers to adapt the processes to take advantage of new capabilities and help establish a true data-driven manufacturing culture. They use a unique approach to combine the smart manufacturing and lean factory, smart factory and lean factory, there we go, to create a real-time lean environment. So today we're really going to be focusing on cultural adoption of Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 technologies can have a massive impact on your company by adding new capabilities to the business. These capabilities can directly plug value leaks such as downtime, scrap, inventory, and employee health. So this morning, we're going to learn how to create a culture that embraces these new capabilities to drive positive change in your business. So before I dive too deep into details, don't forget at the end of this, we will be doing a Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A function. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and that at the end, we will address those, as well as feel free to reach out to us if you want to learn any more information after this presentation. So this morning, I am pleased to be joined by our speakers. We have Malika Woodhaven, Team Lead Systems Engineering, Rob Simmons, Business Development, Pam Dwyer, Manager Injury Prevention, and Tim Stewart, Principal Visual Decisions. Thank you all so much for being here virtually this morning and sharing your expertise. The floor is yours, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just do some quick introductions first. My name is Tim Stewart. I am president at Visual Decisions. And as Allison mentioned, we combine the smart factory and the lean factory to help our customers get the most out of those solutions and achieve value. Next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pam Dwyer, and I am the manager within the injury prevention team here at Sandalwood Engineering and Ergonomics. And the injury prevention team at Sandalwood is comprised of safety engineers as well as ergonomic engineer engineers where the focus is risk reduction. So whether it's a person performing work on an assembly line or manually handling materials or presenting data or information for people or to people for them to easily interpret, we look to ensure the work that needs to be done is done safely and optimally for the human to reduce that risk of injury or to reduce human error. Malika?
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everyone. My name is Malika Woodhaven. As Allison mentioned, I'm a team lead with the Systems Engineering Department at Sandalwood Engineering and Ergonomics. Our systems engineering team is really focused on providing services that also reduce risk to our clients. We add value by providing solutions in areas such as manufacturing, engineering, quality, and project management. I specialize in the areas of digital engineering and business process development and re-engineering. So Rob, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Malika. Hey, everyone, I'm Rob Simmons, and I'm with Sandalwood's Systems Integration Services, and we do IoT solutions and optimization with business systems, business management systems, production management systems, and also OT cybersecurity. Back to you, Tim.
Excellent. So we're here today to talk about creating an Industry 4.0 culture. And if you don't know what Industry 4.0 is, it is a set of different technologies that tie into many different parts of the business. And you can have an impact on labor, inventories, quality, asset utilization, resources, and so forth. And you can make a big impact on the productivity of each one of those different areas. But one of the things that we like to point out is that even though you see all these things in this wonderful McKinsey model, we've experienced that technology alone isn't enough. And that the analogy that I use all the time is a Fitbit. And I've been wearing a Fitbit since about 2013, and I have definitely not lost any weight during that time. And the problem isn't the Fitbit. The Fitbit works great. The sensors in there track, all my steps. They track different activities and so forth. It gives me pretty charts and graphs that I can look at to see, how much activity I've been doing and so on, how many calories I'm burning. But I haven't changed my behaviors. And because I haven't changed my behaviors, I'm not getting the value that I thought I would from the Fitbit. And it's the same thing on the manufacturing floor. You can put any of these different Industry 4.0 technologies in place, but unless you actually change the process, unless you actually change the way that people do their day-to-day work, you're not going to get the value that you were hoping from these different technologies. And so what we've put in place is a path to success where, on the left side, we have a fairly typical model where you start by mapping out the vision, you tie that into the different value drivers and so forth. You make the best use of the systems that are already in place that you can, and you optimize how those are being utilized within the environment. You fill the capability gaps. As you've done your mapping, hopefully you find where you have those gaps, and you fill those with those new capabilities. And you look across different processes to see where you have leverage points that may span different departments. A great example there is warranty, where I've got warranty data coming from out in the field, and maybe with Industry 4.0, I can add some telematics to that so that I actually get information about the use of the product out in the field. And I can combine that with my repair information and so forth that I get from a traditional warranty application. But where you can start to get real leverage on that is not only looking at that warranty data in itself, but now coming back into the manufacturing floor. And if I have some of that telematics data, I know which item that was that had an issue out in the field, and I can tie that into what was happening on the manufacturing floor as that item was built. And then I can take that back an even further step and go into engineering and look at how engineering can change their designs based on the ease of manufacture, as well as how it gets used out in the field and what shows up in warranty and what doesn't. So there's a lot of different ways that I can impact the business there. But what this shows is that throughout that entire process, we have to keep in mind what is the impact on the culture and the process of the organization so that we can really utilize those technologies to their fullest. So as we go through this, we'll ask a few questions. And the first question that we're going to ask is, who needs to change? And the typical answer to this is, the people on the shop floor, the operators, the supervisors, production management. And as we implement these technologies, we're asking these people to either input information into them or use the displays out on the shop floor, the visual controls and so forth, as part of their standard work for their daily jobs and so on. And it's absolutely true. We do need them to take advantage of these capabilities, but you can't forget focusing also on some of the support teams. So the manufacturing engineers, continuous improvement, quality, maintenance and facilities, even other groups like supply chain, purchasing, and so forth. But if we look at, for instance, how continuous improvement does their job and running Kaizen events, just as an example. As you're picking which Kaizen event you should run for the business, you want to pick one that has a big impact. But how do you arrive at how big of an impact that event is going to have? Well, you need data for that. You have to understand how much downtime is being generated or how big the quality issues are. And once you have that data, you can start to understand which event should I be running based on how much I think it's going to provide for the business. The second thing is that as you're going through that Kaizen event, you start to have to do root cause analysis. And as you're going through that root cause analysis, the traditional method within an event is to go out to the floor, clipboard, stopwatch, and collect data, tick sheets, whatever it might be. And there's a better way. Utilizing these technologies, I can collect very, very detailed information about what is happening within the process, and I can have all of that information collected already. They say that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The best time to start collecting data is last year or the year before, so that as I do my root cause analysis, I already have that information available. And so all of these support teams really need to change the way that they do their jobs in order to take advantage of these capabilities as well. We have to break down the barriers between IT and OT so that all of these different sensors and so forth are addressable on the network. We can get that information, we can house it. We make sure that we don't break any rules in terms of how the information gets stored and so forth. We adhere to all the security policies and everything else. And so all of those things need to be tightly integrated with the IT infrastructure of the company. And finally, management really has to embrace and lead the change. And with some stories around all of this, I'm going to pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm a big fan of management leadership books and business strategy books. And I'm sure all of us can think of examples that emphasize emotional and cultural leadership in the workplace. And I think one of the ironies of IoT and the technology we work with is that emotional and cultural leadership becomes more explicit as a need in implementing IoT technology. That has the potential to flatten the organization and speed up feedback loops. And so our team is going to kind of color this with real world stories in our backgrounds. And we're going to have some are positive and some are negative. And the first example I'll share is a solution at the former company I worked with. And we had a real-time quality inspection solution on a lawnmower manufacturer. It was a powerful solution, rich data, real time, and it hit budget. It was all implemented, but it was a cultural issue that we hit that in the end it failed. And it was done in a large company, and it was strictly done in the silos. And in this case, it was done in QC's silo, and it really didn't have buy-in from production. And so even though everything worked, it didn't support the goals, and they didn't really use a lot of rich real-time production data that they could have. And the same solution was implemented to 2 other customers afterwards and were enormous successes. And so that's one of the cleanest examples I saw of a purely purely cultural barrier to potentially technical success. And I'll leave Malika with another one.
All right, thanks, Rob. So those are some great points on that cross-functional buy-in. So while everyone does need to buy in on this change, I really want to focus in on Tim's last point, which is that management has to both embrace and lead the change. Your leadership team is going to be that most pivotal adopter. They're going to set the tone for how this change is perceived and how well it's going to be executed. There's a quote from Deloitte that I really like, which is, "When strategy leads, success follows." And we've seen a lot of examples of that in our work. The one example I'm going to bring up is 3D assembly process simulation. For years, this 3D simulation existed with an automotive OEM that we worked for, but they were leveraging it as a way to validate rather than as a proactive tool for finding some manufacturing feasibility issues. The department had pushed, can we make this a part of the core engineering work? And they didn't really get a lot of traction. So why is that the case? Their leadership team was not totally bought in, and therefore they never were really able to make this a part of the team's work. They were utilizing this tool, but it wasn't really part of the standard process. However, in the last few years, what we've seen is that they've had some churn in their leadership team, and this new leadership team saw the value in this tool. And what they did, which was critical, was that they communicated that out. They really advocated that there was a need to better integrate this into their organization. And lo and behold, now it's a part of every program's standard work. And I think this really highlights that criticality of having your leadership team involved in that new cultural shift of technology. It's going to make sure that you see those benefits in the short and long term. So I'll pass it to Pam to talk a little bit about that IT piece.
Thanks. Yeah, so my experience is really with, proof of concepts and implementation and things like that, and scoping what those proof of concepts look like, primarily around like augmented reality, virtual reality, and 3D simulation. And so from that perspective, IT is so important. And I think our biggest lessons learned is bringing the IT team on board as soon as possible, or even from inception of that proof of concept. So for those organizations who are just starting to explore and get into this industry 4.0 space, we have learned that if the IT team is not on board from the very beginning, the time to actually finish the proof of concept, or the time to implementation, or the time to rollout increases significantly, sometimes 3 to 4 times as long. Some of this new tech challenges and stretches current or existing IT protocols or standards that are in place, or they have policies or protocols in place that you need to know about ahead of time to ensure data security and should be accounted for in the project scoping. We've worked with a lot of smaller startup software companies, and some things fall through the cracks during the project scoping if there's no one on the team looking at that scope or looking at that proof of concept through the IT lens. Most recently, things like, it seems so small, but utilizing I always get this wrong, multi-tenant shared cloud to use during the testing or the proof of concept phase may not be allowed or permissible based on your IT standards. So meaning your information is shared in a cloud where a whole bunch of other people's information is. So if you don't know that in your project scoping, you can go down the path and then realize, oh gosh, we can't house our data here. So you either may not even get out of the gate, or you're going to be paying a heck of a lot more money and a lot more time for a single tenant cloud server to prove the value, or to prove that proof of concept. So I hope this lesson learned is clear. Engage IT as soon as possible to ensure a solid and agreed upon plan. Thanks, Tim.
All right, so our next question is how much change is required. So we started off with who, and now we're asking how much change. And there's a quote that I love from Michelangelo, that the greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our marks. I've worked with a lot of different companies in these projects, and some of them set a goal of improving throughput by 2 or 3%. And while that's great and provides definitive payback for the project and so forth. It's a very low target, and it's something that they might be able to achieve even without doing these projects. And the more audacious the goal, the bigger the goal is, the more transformative that effort can become. And so, for me, these solutions definitely have the opportunity to transform the operations, and it should be looked at as a transformative project. The next thing I want to cover in this question is, how big should you implement it first? And I'm definitely a fan of trying out the technology in a small area, where you pilot it, in a particular cell or small contained pilot. But once you've actually proven out that the technology itself works, then you need to go big. Because of all of these cultural aspects that we've talked about, if you keep it contained in a small area, you're not going to be able to get that cultural change, and it's going to inhibit the value that you can get from it. I worked with this one customer, and that customer piloted everything on one machine within a cell, and they weren't getting the value from it. And they were saying, until we get the value, we don't want to go forward. And I kept telling them, if you go to the pool in the summertime and all you do is dip your toe in the water, you're not going to cool off. And so eventually you're going to have to actually expand this out to at least cover that entire department or value stream, so that the supervisors and the people that are the production supervisors and so forth, production management, will actually change how they do their jobs. When they did their shift change meetings, they ignored the data from the system because they had 12 machines in there and only one of them was on the system. When they were talking with maintenance about different activities and so forth, well, they weren't having maintenance look at this data to determine what should be done from a PM perspective. And so all of those things that you actually do in order to get value from that IoT solution that we had in place there weren't being done. And so they weren't getting the value from it. And eventually I was able to convince them that they had to at least put this application in across that one department, so that as that department did its job, they could utilize the data properly. And lo and behold, they started getting the value from it as soon as they did that. So with additional stories around this, turn it over to Rob.
Thanks, Tim. So I think this one is a particularly key subject because, as you can imagine, a large percentage of our projects is new business. It's new processes, it's pioneering. And you're constantly balancing two different, almost competing disciplines. The first is to have clear goals, clear targets and metrics for it, and timeframes. And focus on this first downs and build off it, like Tim's saying. But there's a competing skill needed, the soft side of the business with culture and even intuition, that as you're doing this new development and this new possibility, to be open to new threats or new opportunities that were not foreseeable as you enter the project. On that lawnmower example I just gave you guys, they weren't lacking in discipline in that application, but they were definitely guilty of being reactive to an issue instead of proactive and looking for things. I think a great alternative story is we did a project that we were focused on reducing raw materials at a furniture manufacturer by 30%. And once we opened up the project, the team was very collaborative and they kept finding new gains. So we ended up doubling. They reduced their inventory by over half. It was pretty remarkable. And of course, the tech that we provided helped, but it was really about them leveraging new possibilities with processes. And in fact, they went further and got more gains in processing and clerical labor using the tools that we provided to the full advantage. And so now that's another example. It really wasn't the tech, it was the soft side of the business and the leadership that made the difference. Malika?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I'd have to totally agree with you. I think it can be easy at times to focus solely on the tool or technology that you neglect to see or address how this change impacts the people in the organization. So in regards to that start small, then go big mentality, we've seen that companies have better success with adoption when they're able to demonstrate small but critical wins. Therefore, your proof of concept and pilot actually allows for a few things when it comes to culture. First, it's going to be able to tangibly showcase the value. If you can justify the change, people are more likely to be accepting. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later today. And the other thing that's really critical is that this helps you address concerns to better plan for that large scale adoption. Along the way, hopefully, if you're communicating well, you're going to be able to see what things you need to address as we start talking about how many people it's going to touch in the future. So the example that I have regarding this is the implementation of IPS, which is a flexible modeling tool at an automotive OEM. We came in, we determined what tool would be a good application, and we facilitated some proof of concepts and pilots. And what was really helpful for us during this process was clear communication to all the players involved, so the engineering staff as well as visibility up the chain. So talking to different levels of leadership and really showcasing what this tool was going to be able to do for them and how it's going to be able to add value. And that step, that clear communication and visibility, was instrumental in our success with this tool. From this, as Tim mentioned, the big benefit is being able to then have a large scale and wide scale usage of the tool. And what we found with that wide scale usage is that we also got wide scale acceptance. People understood why we were doing this and what the value could be. And they were able to leverage this tool on all programs moving forward. So it was a big win for us. So Tim, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks. So our next question is, what is standing in the way? And one common reaction to change is to kind of bury your head in the sand and kind of pretend that, this might not happen if I don't pay any attention to it. And with an example of, this reaction to change and so forth, Pam is going to talk about the human factors.
Yeah, so change is complex, right? And how individuals react to change is even more complex and vast. So it's hard to generalize how people will respond because there's so many individual specific factors or lifestyle factors that could influence this. But in general, people are naturally hardwired to reject change or to not feel comfortable with change. It's just the way it is. Part of the brain hardwires itself and creates paths when you have consistent and repeatable tasks. It becomes habitual and the brain literally hardwires itself. So you know what to expect, you know how to do your job. And it becomes, again, habitual for your brain. And there is a sense of comfort and familiarity with this. And it makes people feel safe and it makes people feel secure. And then when change is required, your brain has to literally rewire itself to create these new habitual wired paths, which then causes that natural reaction to reject it. So it's natural for people to resist change and push back, okay? It can be a hard thing for people to accept, especially again, depending on the individual factors, but then also depending on the enormity of the change that's needed by the individual. So we're going to talk about some ways to overcome this natural reaction to change. And from a pure human psychological perspective, a way to decrease this natural reaction to change is, like Malika said, to communicate the why. Explaining why the change is taking place will help people to mentally prepare and understand the reason for that change. And it slowly starts the brain rewiring and in preparation for what change is coming. And it'll slowly create those new brain paths. So explaining the why makes the rewiring of the brain easier to write and then ultimately to accept it. And it eases that natural instinct to reject the change. So explaining the why, not only from a big picture, but then also from a specific perspective is needed. So understanding how the change impacts them or people directly and individually and on their specific work tasks are key. So this is the soft side of change. invoking change, but it's just as necessary and important. So I just wanted to emphasize that and highlight that. Thanks, Tim.
All right, so how do we overcome this reaction to change? And the next section of the presentation is going to be on some of the things that we have found very successful for addressing these human factors and so forth. And certainly you can utilize a standard change management methodology such as Cotter's books and so forth. But specifically around Industry 4.0, we have found the following things to be very helpful. Certainly developing that vision and strategy and communicating that out to people and having them understand the whys, as Pam was talking about. But then also leveraging what people already know so that you minimize the initial change, utilizing visual controls so that they can see things out on the floor and in their daily jobs, creating a management operating system that will help them, help guide them through what they should be doing, and then also utilizing standard work for leaders so that people understand on a day-to-day basis exactly what they're supposed to be doing to utilize these things. So we'll address those one at a time. And the first one is the vision. And we try to let the business case guide that vision. So if we understand what are the high-level things that the business is trying to achieve, for instance, are they trying to increase throughput or reduce costs or improve quality? What are those high-level objectives? And then what are the immediate problems that are impeding them from improving their performance in those different areas? It could be any number of different things. And then for excessive downtime, impeding throughput, what are the things that are actually causing that excessive downtime? So what are the root causes of those different problems? And once we're down at those root cause levels, now we can start to say, what are the specific things from Industry 4.0 that we can put in place that will address those root causes? And so as we're looking through the huge set of different things that Industry 4.0 can provide, what are these specific capabilities that we want to put in place that directly address the root causes for the current performance? And by doing that, first of all, we create a roadmap for what it is that we want to implement, and what it is that's going to provide or could provide the most value. But now that we have those different elements laid out there, we can start to say, now what are the changes to the standard work? What are the changes to the process? What training do we have to put in place to support this so that we can actually take maximum advantage of those new capabilities within our culture to make this change happen? And that's when you actually get the benefits or the outcomes that you're looking for. So once that plan is created, you have to communicate that effectively, and you have to communicate it in such a way that everybody understands how it impacts them. And if you don't have that path clearly laid out, people have that natural reaction to change where there's a lot of uncertainty, and they start to fear the change and so forth. But if you can lay out how it's impacting the individuals, then they're much more likely to go along with it and actually embrace it and participate. So with some lessons learned around this, I'll turn it over to Malika.
Thank you. I think Tim said it really well. The business case really needs to drive your vision and strategy. And when we work with our clients to determine that business case, one strategy that we like to employ is process mapping. Process mapping is the visual depiction of steps that dictate a process. I think it's important to note that there's a lot of value in visualization, and that's actually due to how your brain is going to process this information. So I just pulled these stats recently, but it says of all the information transmitted to the brain, about 90% is visual. And opposed to text, visuals are processed 60,000 times faster. So when it comes to process mapping, we're able to easily and quickly disperse information to the teams. So as listed here, we typically like to create current state and future state maps with our clients. And what we see is that current state mapping is a good way to visually communicate your baseline. what you're going to be able to do is very easily confirm process accuracy. And this one is actually quite interesting. For larger companies or large processes, usually they're quite cross-functional. And when we've gone in with these clients to create these current state maps, it's quite interesting to see that a lot of people have different ideas of what their process really is. And so establishing that baseline is going to be really critical as you determine where you want to go. Another thing that current state mapping really allows us to do with our clients is identify gaps and opportunities very quickly for things like Industry 4.0 technologies. It's really interesting to see companies as they look at these current state maps and say, oh, wow, why are we doing it this way? Or, oh, I didn't realize this was what was going on. So there has been a lot of value in just having that time together to visually look at what's going on within an organization. One thing that we also like to do then is employ these future state maps and just say, all right, now that you know where you are, where do you want to go? What does that ideal state look like for you? And so these are just helpful things that we've done with our clients to say, all right, this is, what needs to dictate your vision and strategy. And really that comparison of current to future state is ideal in explaining the what and the why as you start going outwards and communicating, as Tim mentioned, that vision and strategy. So with that, I'll pass it to Pam.
Thanks, Malika. So as Malika said, understanding your current state map will help identify and understand the gaps that you have, which is then important to understand then your needs and make better and more informed and strategic decisions as a result of that. And so the biggest thing that I want to emphasize here is, don't fall for the big shiny objects. I can't tell you how many people we've worked with in the past who have purchased, those big shiny things or the new tech that's on the market or expensive items because someone with purchasing power within an organization saw it at a trade show, saw it in the news, or saw it on a YouTube clip and said, I want that. So it gets purchased, and then people have to figure out how to fit it into the process or figure out how it works and how to best leverage it within the process. And then, honestly, 5 to 10 years later, after collecting dust in the basement for a few years, it gets donated to a university or a college. 15 years or so ago, caves were a big thing, where you immersed yourself in this huge cave that had, it kind of felt like you were immersed into a virtual world, or even motion capture cameras in arenas were the latest craze. And so they were purchased because they were the latest craze, like I said, 15 years or so ago, but then they were purchased without being strategic or without understanding what gap it could be filling in your process or where it could be really leveraged and fit into that process. So honestly, they were donated years later because they just weren't being used. And they weren't purchased without understanding where they could fit into the process or what gap they were going to be looking to fill. Now I see it most recently with HoloLenses. Lots of people purchased the HoloLens 1, 2 years ago or so, and it sat in their drawer. And now we're on to the HoloLens 2 and they want to buy that, but they didn't even leverage HoloLens 1. So how are they, so just understanding how the tech can fit into your process and how to best leverage it is a big lesson learned, I think that we learned. So Rob, let's hear what the lesson that you learned.
Okay, thanks, Pam. And so my anecdote for this one, it's another one from before Sandalwood. And I've been implying that we did our job technically. This is a case where it wasn't going well technically. And it was a large paper mill. And you can imagine the cost of downtime by the minute, the thousands of dollars. So their MRO work there is mission critical. And as a result, over the years, they had a lot of safety barrier and fat in the MRO application. So the purchasing manager really wanted to lean that out without hurting that mission critical performance. So we were brought on with the technology involved in doing that. And Murphy's Law, Murphy had a field day. Just everything that could go wrong went wrong. It strained the relationship with us and them initially. But what Tim and Pam were talking about in terms of laying things out, having a vision, and bringing everybody on board. He was doing this the whole time. He had buy-in from all the players involved and the stakeholders, and he turned some technical problems into opportunities. But basically, it was just straight leadership, and it ended up they achieved the results. They saved enormous money and ended up improving responsiveness during the process, and that was pure leadership. The technology didn't go well at first at all, and I think that's a great example of the cultural side. Tim?
All right, thanks. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is leveraging what people already know, or leveraging what some people already know. And along these lines, you don't necessarily need to rip and replace everything that you already have in the shop floor to implement an Industry 4.0 system. And what we want to do here is, if we have systems that are in place, how can we get some quick wins by utilizing those systems more effectively? And how can we make that information that's in those systems more available, more accessible, and more usable? So what we've looked at in the past is to, first of all, understand where the performance of that system is falling short. How can we get information from those and drive more value from that? How can we respond faster to the issues on the floor by putting some visual controls in place and so forth? How can we really utilize the Hawthorne effect to drive value? And if you're unfamiliar with the Hawthorne effect, it's that people behave differently when they know they're being watched. And it doesn't have to be a person standing there. If you put a visual control in place that shows current level of performance, that actually stands in for that person watching. And so by tying some of these things together, we've been able to really drive that success for our customers right away. And one example of that is that we're working with a paint company, or paint product company, and they had just some really basic systems. And they had basically what they were producing and what the plan was. And by tying those two things together, we were able to produce what is the plan adherence percentage, and present a nice graphical chart of that, and really lead the Kaizen process to say, where are we having issues meeting our schedule? And by simply doing that, we were able to drive some significant gains and get some quick wins. And then over time, we were able to essentially utilize the money that we had saved previously to pay for new systems that could collect much more detailed data that allowed us to do much more sophisticated improvements to the process. But we got started by utilizing the systems that everybody knew, letting them interact with something that they were already comfortable with, ease that process of getting into the change and having them accept that actually, we're just going to utilize these things better. We're going to tie this more into the culture of the organization, and we're going to move things ahead that way. So with some lessons learned around this, I'll turn it over to Rob.
Thanks, Tim. So I'll give two examples here. And they were both corporate initiatives. So we were putting in a preventative maintenance technology solution, and in a tier 1 automotive supplier. And corporate did not trust their operations on this function, and this was top down, and it was essentially based on trying to shore up failures in what they were doing. So when we came in, there wasn't a lot of prep or buy-in from the local team. Well, we got in there, and the local team started working with us, and they were immediately providing knowledge to the process that we had not initially scoped into the project. And we quickly turned back to our corporate buyers and said, we think this ought to be put into the solution. Since it was one way and pushed down, those changes weren't adopted, they weren't accepted. And, it got in, it worked, it provided data, but it really didn't change the results that much. And it really didn't get pulled in. And, in 2 years, those corporate people moved up or out. And it was dropped like a hot potato once there was a personnel change in corporate. Exact opposite happened with a somewhat similar solution at a HVAC producer. And in this case, the corporate had really done their homework. It was one of the best prepared jobs I saw. And so we thought this was just going to be in and done. Well, we got in the local facility, and they gave very positive, critical feedback that really presented new opportunities to get a whole secondary yield. So corporate would be getting the reporting they wanted, but the local operation could leverage it for a lot of real-time corrections and that they normally do after the fact. And in this case, corporate wanted that buy-in and embraced it. And really, we forked the project into 2 gains off the same investment. And they were getting the data they wanted at corporate, and they were getting real-time correction tools at the location. And the only difference was the people involved. Malika?
Yeah, thanks. So I have a little bit of a different take on leveraging what people already know. So when we work with these Industry 4.0 initiatives, I think it can become very easy to work in silos, put your blinders on, and just try to come up with a new solution for this issue you're finding. But as Tim mentioned, that's really not going to yield those quick wins that you might be looking for. So it's important really to do your due diligence and ensure that you're addressing your initiatives by looking for those opportunities within. So the example that I have is a project that we worked on with a large automotive OEM. And what they were trying to do was understand what went wrong during their launch. So what they did was they took a look at their lessons learned and found, oh, wow, there were a lot of issues when it came to wire harness branch lengths. And so this was kind of our precursor to that proof of concept and pilot I mentioned earlier. And so we started to look at different options for maybe solving this issue earlier on in the process. And after doing a bit of research, doing that due diligence I referenced, what we found is that the product development organization was actually utilizing a tool that could be applied for this application. What we found is that this tool could work for the manufacturing feasibility issues we were seeing. And after communication with that particular team, doing some research, finding that this tool was being utilized and approved from their IT standpoint, we were able to implement it in the manufacturing sector here to help them. And it also saved a lot of money and time by leveraging what was already existing. So a little bit of a different take on leveraging what people know, but still showcasing how critical it is to really make sure you vet all your options and all the things that are going on within your organization. So pass it over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Malika. Our next section is on using visual controls. And visual controls can have a huge impact on how much this becomes a part of people's daily life, because it's right there out on the shop floor and it's in their face, so to speak. And I do want to take a minute to talk about traditional visual controls around lean manufacturing. And I am a longtime lean guy. I don't want to say how long, but a longtime lean guy. And, I grew up with, the whiteboards and the tick sheets and, the paper forms and, so forth. And I understand the value of people's fingerprints being on the process and being able to gather around the board for these conversations that you see in the upper left and so forth. But as lean professionals, it's time to let go of the whiteboards. People can still get the interaction with the data by using that data to make improvements. And you don't have to have them write the numbers up on the board anymore. You don't have to have them count. You don't have to have them manually do the math to fill out a SPC chart and so forth. It's okay that that's done automatically. You just need to let them, utilize that information as part of their standard work so that they still are interacting with everything, but they're interacting with it at a higher level rather than just maintaining the data itself. that leads to, being data driven. And this is Industry 4.0. Data is, kind of the basic point of all this. And so we want to make that data a part of people's lives. And where you have skills gaps and so forth, you need to identify those for people that are going to have a challenge with this. But as you look at the transition to a younger workforce in the future and so forth, they're going to have a much easier time working with those computer interfaces, utilizing the information from those to, as part of their daily activities and so forth. And so you take advantage of that and really be data driven and utilize that information to really make an impact on the process. Now, what data should we be using and how should we create that alignment? And if we look at the data that we use, that should align to the changes that we want in the process itself. So if we're a lean company or Six Sigma or a lean Six Sigma, if we're focused on OEE or quality or total productive maintenance or any of these different philosophies or activities, if you want to think of them as that, you should be collecting data that will support those different processes. And so without getting into too much detail, just keep those things in mind for, over the long term, what is the data that you're going to want in order to support, those different initiatives. I will also say that you should, focus on value as much as you can. So we started off this whole process by mapping out the value, but we can show people the value on these boards and so forth if we can dollarize those impacts. And a quick story here is that I had a customer that was, kind of having trouble having people relate to the amount of scrap that they were having. So, they would report scrap based on the number of pieces and so forth. That's very traditional. But the plant manager there actually started reporting scrap and the number of equivalent Ford F-150s they were losing on a monthly basis. And by putting it that way, his people actually had more of a visceral reaction to, what was the real impact of, tossing that piece into the bin, as opposed to, doing that work right and, getting it right the first time. And so having that dollarization of, the results can really make a big impact on how people perceive it. So with some lessons learned around all of this, I'll turn it over to Rob.
Thanks, Tim. So I have to state here, this is a particularly strong offering from Sandalwood. We do a lot of work with war rooms and workstations. And one of the reasons it's a real competency for us is it's combining the systems integration and technical side with the human side and ergonomics and system engineering. So this is a particularly dear subject to us. And, you hear a lot of people talk about the difference between data and noise and actionable business intelligence. It's particularly acute when you're on the floor and you're working with real-time data that you want to improve your reaction times. So separating the wheat from the chaff on the data we're feeding in there, it's one thing that we're trying to increase the reach of what we can feed in on visual controls with data. It gets a little bit more intuitive and relies a lot on experience in choosing what you want real time in a mashup view versus what you want after the fact in reports and pouring through it. And of course, what we were talking about earlier, the real key is getting input from the actual players and stakeholders on the floor as you're doing this. So what you're really looking for is a sweet spot. The rich, as much rich data as really is going to be used in real time by an operator who's handling many things at once. And to speak further on that, I'll let Pam talk about that.
Thanks, Rob. So, getting back to sort of visual displays, what information or data, whatever is being displayed is going to be consumed by a human at the end of the day. So it's important to ensure the design and the layout of this visual data is intuitive, logical, and that it reduces human error. So how something is designed or displayed will depend on the interface being used to display the data. For example, information displayed on a handheld tablet may be different than information displayed on a computer monitor that's 20 feet away, which may be different than information displayed on an Andon board, which may be different than even like information on a head-mounted display. So there's different standards and there are different design principles that need to be included to ensure the human has an intuitive and pleasant experience with those visual displays, and that it does not create accidental or unknown human error. So including the human in the design of the visual displays, but then also including a review of what we call the user experience, or a human review or checkpoint in the alpha or beta testing milestones as well. So this should be consistent and unbiased testing with new users. So not just the development team who knows what the information is, know where the data is coming from, and they know how to interpret it already because they've developed it, but people who are new to it and that would be ultimately consuming that data at the end of the day. So this will provide feedback to the development team to, again, reduce human interpretation errors. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. So the next subject is to talk about the Industry 4.0 management operating system. And if you're unfamiliar with the concept of management operating system, one example is Hoshin Connery or policy deployment, where you start off with what are the high-level goals of the organization, and you roll that down through a series of steps into what are the initial or short-term initiatives that an individual or a group has for their team. And you're tying all this together through, the annual objectives and everything else. You're looking at what are the resources that are going to be required? How do you tie this into the critical metrics and so forth? And by going through this process, you really are creating alignment from the different levels of the organization. And looking at, everything from the CEO or the COO, all the way down through to the shop floor. And that's the purpose of that management operating system, is to create that alignment. And, in manufacturing, it's very often grouped, the metrics are very often grouped around safety, quality, delivery, cost, inventory, manpower, and environmental is, kind of a more recent addition to those categories. But really what we're trying to do is just drive, again, what is that alignment between the strategic level, the tactical, and the operational, or if you will, between the team leaders all the way through the corporate staff. And great example of this that we've implemented is I have a chief operating officer who I've actually worked with on doing this process in multiple customers, plus other customers as well, where we're taking the real-time metrics from the shop floor and a number of different systems, and we're bubbling those up through the different layers of the organization to the point where he has his weekly cadence call with his direct reports, including all the different plant managers. And he looks at this report, and we can see kind of at a glance over here on the left side for that week, which plants missed their KPIs on the different sections and so forth. And then over to the right, we see the details of what is the target, what's the actual, what was the miss. If you hover your cursor over the top of it, you can actually see the explanation for why that miss took place, or you can read it down on the bottom of the screen. And then you can also see what are the corrective actions that are in place, who's responsible, when is the expected date of improvement, and so forth. And by putting all of this in one place, what we're able to do is to really create a focus where that COO has standard work every week, where he walks through this process, talks about all the misses with his direct reports, And then, they have a meeting with their direct reports the day before, and they go through this process, at their level, where instead of looking at the different plants, they're looking at the different lines or different departments within that plant and talking to their reports about it. And, then they are doing the same process with their people underneath. And so it's creating that alignment from top to bottom of the organization and really utilizing the actual data so that people can see where they are during the week, as opposed to just having that number surprise them at the end. And all of this, kind of is a great example of creating that standard work for leaders. We focus on the standard work for operators all the time, that, as you're running the machine, you should run it the same way on second shift that the guy on first shift runs it. When you rotate, people should be, doing it the exact same way every time. But we don't focus on standard work for leaders nearly as much. And that process that I just went through is a great example of, you may not do everything, from a standard work perspective as a leader, but you should have standard work as part of your approach to how you're doing your daily jobs. And that brings us to kind of a daily accountability process, kind of going through that checklist on a daily basis or a weekly basis and saying, what are the things that, I need to do today? What are the different things that I need to be checking on? What are the different values I should be checking against, and so forth? And it's always a good time for a Gandhi quote, in my opinion. And so, as a leader within the organization, you should be the change that you want to see. And, so if you're wanting people to adopt this new solution and adapt what they're doing on a daily basis, you should do so as well. And this goes back way to the beginning, where we talked about how management needs to be part of that process. And by doing the standard work, by making this part of your daily life, by having that operating system in place, you set the tone for everybody else that, this is the way that we're doing things going forward. With some lessons learned around, this whole process, we're going to talk to Rob.
Thanks, Tim. So this is just last year, and a very positive example of a lot of things we were talking about. This was a tier 1 automotive supplier. They already had a decent IoT system in place, and we were brought in to improve the quality of the data and especially push down to the line, corrections and rounding out some of the inputs into the IoT structure at the workstations. So pretty much followed the formula that we've been talking about in this. They had clear deliverables, but they flexed a little bit and took advantage of things as we put it in. And particularly on the visual controls, there was a really good collaboration on getting that sweet spot we talked about. And right when we were about to go to implementation, he reached out to the sister plants that this was to be rolled out to as well. And not only did he save a downstream expense, because we ended up tweaking the visual controls quite a bit so that it was scalable, they ended up getting a really good feedback loop about the standard work. So it was really a cultural change coming out of technology questions. And I thought it was a great example of a proactive action and getting in stakeholders by the customer. Malika?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So the example I have is an interesting one, at least for me. So this is a project that was done prior to my time with Sandalwood about 15, 20 years ago. And I found the lessons learned from this to be, as I mentioned, very interesting, so worth sharing. So to kind of go off of what Tim had mentioned, I think it's one thing to implement, but it's another thing to see the benefits and have that integrated into the culture of your company. And so our company was brought in to help showcase the benefits of an error-proofing implementation. We were brought in to kind of justify the cost using that SQDCME, and we did that. We were able to show that to the company. They decided to move forward with the project. We worked with them, and that was it for quite a while. And then 1 year later, they come back to us and they said, hey, can we take a look to see how we measure against those benefits that you identified last year. And so what we saw is that there was a year of time where there was a loss of opportunity for process improvement. And it could have just been the timing back in the day and everything, but I think it's always important to kind of take those projects and just say, what more could we do? How can we keep this better in front of our company to ensure that this is, as Tim mentioned, part of the standard work for our leaders? So I think moving forward, as I mentioned, it's just a really good opportunity for us to take a step back and say, well, what else could we do? And I think that it was just a missed opportunity and one that we definitely learned from too. So Tim, back to you.
All right, thanks, Malika. So we've covered a lot of different topics, but what else can be done to really drive success? One thing is to look at the improvements across different time horizons. So as you're considering these different projects and so forth, one way to think about this is, how do we use this within the shift, and how are we utilizing the data and the information available from these systems within that shift itself? So what are the reactive things that we're going to be doing, or what are the proactive things that we're going to be doing on that hourly basis? And then, from a day-to-day perspective, what are some of those daily accountability things that I need to look at? And for the different roles within my organization, how are people going to interact with this data on a day-to-day basis as part of their work? Once we start to get into the weekly and the monthly time horizons, we start to think about, how are we accumulating data over time, and what are the things from history that we want to look at? How are things trending, and how do we recognize and act upon those trends? And so, by thinking across those different time horizons, it really helps shift your mindset into different ways that these things can be used. As you turn up information using these systems, you really need to think about implementing permanent solutions. And a great example here is I had a customer that manufactured shampoo. And in the bottling process, the filler was the key station within that line, packaging line. And there was an overhead conveyor feed to that filler. And what happened all the time was that the bottles on that overhead feed would get jammed, and the operator would have a broomstick actually, and they would take that broomstick over and they would kind of poke at that bottle that was stuck until the bottle either went upright or kind of popped out, and the feed started again. And by the way, the operator got really good at not only poking that out, but catching it as it fell. And so, what I saw in the data was that, every 15, 20 minutes, the filler was stopping, and only stopped for like a minute or so, and then it would start up again. So I watched the process. I saw this happening about 2 or 3 times. I brought the supervisor for the line over, and we stood there together and we watched this happening. And I asked him, so how often does this happen? Because it seems in the data like it's happening a lot. And he said, well, that's just how the line works. And so you have to be cognizant of that mindset of that's just how things work. And instead of just, using that broomstick to clear the bottle all the time, think through what can we do to actually solve that problem so that it doesn't happen again. Along those same lines, the metrics that you're collecting have to be actionable. So there's been a huge focus on OEE in recent years, as well as first pass yield and defects per million and a lot of other high level metrics. And those metrics themselves are great. I mean, in the management operating system that I showed earlier, those are the metrics that we're looking at and so forth. But just understanding my first pass yield went from 93 to 87 doesn't help me fix that problem. All it does is tell me that I have a problem in the first place. And if I don't have the data that underlies that tells me that my OD is out of spec because the result of that is that it's failing to close. If I don't know that information, then it's really hard for me to take action upon it. And with these Industry 4.0 systems, I have the ability to collect not only that high level information, but also the detailed information underneath that helps me get to what are the actual root causes of the problem, what are the impacts of it, and what should be done. And along those same lines, as we look at kind of a maturity matrix for this, the performance analytics, those high level measurements, come first. Those diagnostic metrics that we just talked about come next. And then you can start to get into the predictive. And I've seen a trend lately where people want to go from having nothing on the shop floor to saying, oh, we want predictive maintenance or predictive quality or predictive, whatever. And it's a process. You have to go through the basics before you can really get good at the predictive stuff. Because from a crawl, walk, run perspective, if you try to get the baby to just stand up and do a 100-yard dash, it's probably not going to work out so well. So as you go through this process, you have to be aware, get good at the basics, collect that basic information, and then you can start to move on towards those predictive things. There's a book that I like from an execution perspective by Bossady and Sharon that has a quote. There's an adage that holds true in this discussion. We don't think ourselves into a new way of acting. We act ourselves into a new way of thinking. And for me, what that means is that just saying that, okay, we're going to kind of change our mindset, and because we change our mindset, we're going to behave in a different way. It doesn't really happen all that well. But if we say, okay, these are the changes that we're going to make to standard work, this is our new daily accountability process. This is how we're going to create the management operating system for the organization. And what are we going to change from a behavioral perspective? Those are the things that are really going to change the way that we think, in the beginning. Going back to the very first thing that I talked about, if I really want the Fitbit to work, what I have to do is, instead of just telling myself that I'm going to, diet and exercise more, I really have to change the way that I behave on a daily basis. And that will eventually just change the way I think about things. Finally, for those lean people in the room that are, still reacting to what I said about getting rid of the whiteboards, that doesn't mean that, I want people to stop going out to the floor and, kind of walk away from, all the lessons learned from lean. Gemba is still critical. You still have to be out where the work happens, and you still have to be interacting with the process itself and understand the process in a very detailed way. But what this data allows you to do is, as you're actually walking the floor, now you can actually see more than you can with your eyes. So your eyes will tell you what's happening right now, but the data can tell you how you got to that point, and where things are trending, and can put things within a context that you can't get from just looking at the process itself. And so while all of this is critical, you certainly have the same needs to be on the floor, interact with the process the same way that you had in the past. Rob, Malika, Pam, do you have any kind of closing comments before we go to questions and answers?
Sure, thanks, Tim. I think my outgoing comment from having worked with all these customers in IoT and Industry 4.0, we kind of laughed at, it's Industry 4.0, but that's the name for it, but we've been doing it for years. But my one takeaway would be the old maxim that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That proactive nature in projects where I've seen it has shored up defense and proactively avoided problems, and it's opened up opportunities that wouldn't have been seen if we just strictly followed the plan. And so I think that old saying has entirely new legs in Industry 4.0 initiatives.
Yeah, and my closing statements here, it's a quote from Richard Barrett that I like, which is that organizations don't transform, people do. Companies who fail with failed transformation programs identify employee resistance or management behavior as the major barrier to success. This is a stat from McKinsey. They say that's about 72% of the time. So it just really, I think, highlights that you need to address people's mindsets to have a tangible business impact. And that's really going to be critical for you as you start talking about, well, what can we do in order to have a successful transformation of that entire organization? So it always goes back to the culture and the people here. So that's my last thing here.
And then I guess, when we put the slide together, I don't think we did this intentionally, but it's just funny that the human is the last thing we're going to talk about here, because the human and people is usually the last thing to be considered in a solution or in implementing a solution, but it's the first thing to make a solution or an implementation fail. So it's easy to be focused on numbers and making decisions based on these numbers, but people, humans, are what is going to drive the change. And we need to ensure that we account for how people naturally respond to change, be cognizant of that, and help drive this, and help this drive your vision and your deployment strategy. Communication is the ticket, but I would even want to expand this to the right communication is really the golden ticket, explaining the why and how the specific teams or individuals are influencing or impacting the overall process, and the overall advantage of the change is key. And it's worth mentioning also that, within Industry 4.0, there are so many technologies that exist which are consumed or used by people. So to increase the likelihood of adoption and the reduction of human errors, putting that consideration or thought into the user experience in the design phase is key, because then tech will be intuitive. It won't make people feel frustrated or confused, and it'll make people want to use it again and again. How many times, right, have you, picked up an Android if you're an Apple user and are so frustrated with how to work, it's not intuitive, you don't know what it is, and you just throw it away and you never want to use Android again, right? So it's that same feeling that we get when we have new technology and new solutions. If it's not intuitive, and if it makes us feel frustrated or feel anything for that matter, we're just not going to accept it, and we're going to create a lot of error. That's my last 2 cents.
All right, thank you.
Perfect. Go ahead, Tim.
Sorry, Malika, we seem to have lost your picture there, but I guess at this point we'll turn it over to questions. And I do see one in the Q&A. With what are the top IT security considerations to consider in your digital transformation? I guess
I'll take that as systems integration.
Sounds good.
So the first thing is to not be too predisposed or make too many assumptions coming in, and be disciplined in canvassing the risks methodically. So we tend to break down cybersecurity into 3 areas: architecture and infrastructure. So looking at it empirically for holes and weaknesses. And then, of course, the actual monitoring software and systems, to be methodically looking technically for the threats of entries, unregistered users, et cetera. And what's interesting is we do OT cybersecurity versus IT. So in IT, there's a real emphasis on, if you see something wrong, you want to shut it down and start it right on the spot. You don't want to be doing that with the production line. So OT cybersecurity is more reporting aberrations versus proactively or automatically with the software stopping them. But the third element that's, and it's appropriate for today, talking about culture, is the third leg of the stool for cybersecurity is policies and governance. And just like we talked about with these projects, having a common sense of why you're doing and what you're doing. And as far as the hit list of the things are the usual suspects, You need to have a full inventory of your assets, what's supposed to be on that network. And I think one of the things that's not sexy, but it's not appreciated, but it's a significant risk, is old systems that need patches and are out of date, and their cyber protection. That's typically a major issue on a cybersecurity, that it's not appreciated work. It's not sexy, but good old fashioned patching on PCs on the floor is a common issue.
I have just 2 cents to add to that too. I mean, I'm not an IT person, but I know the importance of them. And for those of you who, are not in the IT world, cloud is everything these days. The cloud, right? Everything is in the cloud. So, it's important that if that is mentioned in the project scoping, or, the software that you're looking to leverage is holding information in the cloud, that's sort of a flag to say, okay, I need to get some IT people in here, because if you're putting confidential or proprietary data in that cloud, it's not as strong as if that data was served on a local server or saved in a local server, for example. And again, tying into, if you have a plant floor server, but if you're using cloud information, and you want to get information from plant server, it just adds extra time. That's also just small little things to consider as well, for my 2 cents.
Perfect. It looks like someone had a question on training. So who, what, when? Do you have any resources? What does training look like for something like this?
Go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to say, everyone, VPs should see what the associates see and what they experience. That's it. Especially for AR/VR, everyone should sort of receive training, I think, on these new techs and on these new technologies that are coming in. But I think the deep training, needs to be fun, and it needs to be different. I think the old way of doing training, where you have a trainer up front who might be showing slides, and you have people sitting there in a chair, research has shown that the comprehension is not as strong as leveraging new ways to do training. So whether that is leveraging technology, headsets, or virtual training, or just more hands-on examples kind of thing, that training, the research is really showing that new ways of training needs to be fun, and it needs to be different, and it needs to be engaging. And then, of course, we do have an aging workforce, so we need to ensure that everyone can learn the tech and the software. So knowing that, some generations pick things up a lot quicker or easier than others, it doesn't mean that the training should be simplified and focused on certain generations.
I agree. And I think this is a great question for today's topic, because all three of our lines of business offer training as part of what we do, and it's underappreciated. It's not sexy, but I wouldn't, Pam, I would think it's one of the best ROIs they get, but it's just not exciting for a lot of people.
Well, and for me, what I see a lot is that the support teams don't get the training that they need to be able to understand what's available and so forth. So, for instance, in some of the IoT initiatives that I've been doing, I'll see the companies train the operators for how to get information in, or look at the visual controls and so forth. But the quality team isn't made aware of what's available within that system, and so they're not using that information when they do a design of experiments or an ANOVA or something along those lines to make improvements. And so having these people aware what's there, how you get it, and how you can utilize it is very important to getting the full value.
Yeah, and I think that really goes back to what you had mentioned, Tim, with standard work for leaders. It's important that these folks are trained, and so it's ingrained into the culture there to ensure that they are going to use it in the way that makes sense for their role in the company. And one thing we also didn't really touch too much on is when, and I think it's really as soon as you can, right? After you go through your pilots, your proof of concepts, really just make sure that this is in front of everyone and that they understand when to use it. I will say there's a caveat with that though. If you aren't going to implement wide scale in like a year and a half or something, it is very easy for people to forget what you trained on during that proof of concept or that pilot. So make sure the timing makes sense with deployment as well, just to ensure that, you know, it is fresh in people's minds as they start using these tools.
I think really any of you guys can answer this next one. Are there any common technologies that you've seen used in successful implementations?
Lots of common technologies.
Maybe your top three, I guess, would be the better question.
Okay, so for me, top three would be IoT and IoT systems, including the sensors and everything else, augmented reality, and then probably machine learning, artificial intelligence.
Mine would be, I think, AR, so augmented reality for quality control or quality validation, I think are some quick technologies that you can bring in quickly and have some small wins. Digital work instructions is another big one, kind of getting back to training, right? So digital work instructions and expert capture are some other quick, really contained solutions or technologies that could be integrated as well successfully. And then of course, 3D simulation, there's a lot more to that, and it's not so quick to get simulation, but there's a high return on investment there as well.
Yeah, that last one was the only one I was going to add as well.
So my personal background is I came into IoT via RFID, and of course with IoT it's mashing up essentially everything digital on the floor. But I think what you're seeing there quickly is the range of things we work with. Both the Sandalwood team is very diverse in the skill sets we bring in. And even that's not enough for Industry 4.0. And that's why Visual Decisions and Sandalwood partner. They play well with others, because if you're really going to serve the customer, there's just so many technologies converging on this that you want to be able to scale to a wide range of technical skills quickly.
Yeah, and it seems like even with this pandemic, there's more and more technologies that are coming to light and being more accepted. So I think that's a really good point, Rob. And I know, so Pam, you mentioned IT is particularly, they need to be on board. So this next question is, what departments should initiate the adoption of Industry 4.0? Is there any others besides IT that should really lead the charge or make sure they're well aware?
It's a really good question. And honestly, I think whoever has the bandwidth to commit and who can bring a multiple cross-functional team together and ensuring that everyone has a seat at the table. I think this team or this initiative team needs to have an indirect link to operations, but they can't be anchored to it, because operations will always win. So we've had so many situations where we get momentum. Yeah, let's go. And then operations draws you back in because fire's always burning and there's always a fire that has to get put out. And so those people get drawn into that and they get sucked away, and that's where they focus. And then this falls away. And then we come back 6 months later and try and get the momentum going again. And so we're just continuously getting pulled away, back and pulled away, and you can't make any progress that way. So it's really a team who can ever pull together a cross-functional team. And that, like I said, has that indirect link to operations, but isn't anchored to it.
I agree. And I think in my mind, what Industry 4.0 is doing is you have to keep a matrix structure for managing souls. But Industry 4.0 and our work in IoT is creating feedback loops where there weren't one. So you're getting communication and collaboration across functions that were traditionally separated. Which gets back to what Pam's answer was with everybody.
Yeah, and I'll just add that people initiating, taking the lead should be the ones with bandwidth, as Pam said. But I'll once again emphasize, management has to be on board, and they have to be backing this, and they have to be participating.
So it looks like we have one more question, and I do have a question of my own. So if any other attendees have any questions, now would be the time to put them in the Q&A box. So the last one, and Rob, you actually mentioned an ROI earlier. So this question is, what are some ROI metrics to justify the changes? I don't know if you want to start on this one.
You're on mute, Rob.
Still.
Sorry, I was looking at my notes and didn't hit my mute off. So sure, and like, so high level, I tend to group them into 6 categories. It's pretty classic, particularly in lean practice. So safety, quality, productivity, and capacity. There's a lot of metrics around customer experience, like on-time deliveries, and you're seeing, and then risk management in general, there's some KPIs around that. What we're seeing new is more environmental and sustainability impact. So it's really easy to quickly go down rabbit holes in particular fields and industries from there. Like, I'd let Pam speak to the safety KPIs. Tim, I guess you and I are typically productivity and capacity. So that's OEE is the classic, right? That's your thing.
Yeah, and what I'll add on to that is that a lot of those are functional metrics. If you look at the income statement and balance sheet for the organization, you can map just about every single entry on that income statement or balance sheet into the improvements that you're going to be making with Industry 4.0. So something like revenue, well, you could improve throughput, or you could improve your quality, which helps you sell at a bigger margin. Just about anything that you have out there can be mapped into these activities.
And then I guess just to emphasize, I think any of your metrics needs to tie into your objectives and your vision. So incorporating your vision for Industry 4.0 into your objectives as much as possible, I think is great too. I know we're tight on time, so that's really my main point there.
Perfect. And I just have one last question that I think can kind of sum up this whole presentation and discussion. And we touched on this with so many new technologies coming out and a new year and hopefully post-pandemic. What's the urgency look like for cultural adoption of Industry 4.0? Is it something that you're way too late, you need to be on board, you're already behind? Is there any last words, I guess, on urgency and what that looks like for companies?
I'll say again that pretty much every single line item on the income statement and balance sheet can be tied back into what you can do with Industry 4.0. And certainly when you have something that can have that broad of an impact, if there isn't a sense of urgency around it, there probably should be. Now, I'll also say that, in this kind of new world that we work in with distancing and everything else, Industry 4.0 provides a lot of capabilities that can help you address remote working, remote support of different sites and so forth that are extremely beneficial right now.
And I'll repeat myself, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, to Tim's planting a tree analogy. So it's not a hard answer unless a competitor's got something directly on you that's compelling you to. It's just the more proactive you are and the earlier you're putting it in, the faster you're getting the gains.
Yeah, and I don't want people to think that, they're 5 years behind if they don't have anything in place right now, right? Like, it's really easy to look at other organizations, especially the big ones, right? Like Microsoft, IBM, Google, like they have so much technology, but they're at the forefronts of it. So just because they might have it integrated doesn't mean that everybody within the chain has it integrated, right? And are actually leveraging and using it. We're still at a point where I don't even know what the percentage is, but it is a small percentage of organizations organizations that are fully leveraging Industry 4.0 technologies and fully integrating everything within there. So it's an elephant, right? And it's small bites at a time, but it's also ensuring that you're not just diving into the whole Industry 4.0 pool and say, I want to do all of it. But it kind of gets back to that, what Malika was saying about the current state mapping and ensuring that the gaps that you have, or the root cause analysis that you have, that you are leveraging the right Industry 4.0 pillars. And I think that's the biggest thing that people need to understand, is they don't have to do all of it. They just need to leverage what could best bring their organization and their processes value.
Anything else that you want to add to that, Malika?
Yeah, that was definitely the point that I was going to drive home, is that really, you're trying to solve issues when you're leveraging these tools. So it's important to keep your eye on that and not, as Pam mentioned, just focus on the big shiny object. Oh, we need to do Industry 4.0. That's not the case. It's just critical that you really take a look at what the business case is for these initiatives to make sure that you are getting that ROI that you're looking for.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Rob, Malika, Tim, and Pam. This has been a great discussion. Your lessons learned, I think, were immensely helpful and will have a big impact on everybody that's attended this. Just a reminder, this is recorded and will be on our website, so feel free to share it or rewatch it. If you have any questions for any of the people presenting today, feel free to reach out to me or Automation Alley, and we can definitely help you. Also, tune in next February 3rd for our next tech takeover with Tata Technologies to learn how you can master engineering complexity through simulation solutions. So thank you so much for spending your morning with me. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.